There are places where the sea keeps secrets, far from the nearest village. Standing alone on a black cliff above a violent stretch of ocean, there was an old lighthouse called Blackwater Point. For more than 100 years, its rotating light had guided ships safely through the darkness. But the lighthouse had one strange legend. People in the village said that whenever the light turned completely red, someone would die before sunrise. Most people laughed at the story, until the night the lighthouse keeper disappeared. His name was Elias Vane. He had lived alone inside Blackwater Lighthouse for 27 years, maintaining the lamp, recording the weather, and watching the sea. He was a quiet man who rarely visited the village. The fishermen knew him, the coast guards respected him, and the children were terrified of him, because of the stories surrounding the lighthouse. Then, one winter evening, Elias sent a message to the village. Only 7 words. "Tonight, the light will show the truth." Nobody understood what he meant. At 11:40 that night, a violent storm struck the coast. Waves crashed against the cliffs. Rain covered the windows. Thunder rolled across the ocean like distant explosions. And then, at exactly midnight, the lighthouse beam disappeared. The village fell into darkness. For 12 terrifying minutes, there was no light from Blackwater Point. Then the beam returned. But it was no longer white. It was red. The villagers watched from their windows as the enormous red beam slowly swept across the sea. Once, twice, 3 times. Then the lighthouse went dark again. The next morning, a Coast Guard boat reached the island. Elias Vane was gone. There was no body, no sign of a struggle. His coat was hanging beside the door. His boots were still near the stairs. His journal was open on the kitchen table. And beside the journal was a cup of tea that was still warm. The only thing written on the final page was a sentence that made no sense. The light does not warn them. It remembers them. 20 years passed. Blackwater Lighthouse was eventually abandoned. The government planned to demolish it, but every attempt failed. Machinery broke. Workers became sick. One crew refused to return after claiming they had heard footsteps moving. Inside the empty tower, the lighthouse became a forgotten place, until a young historian named Mara Ellis became interested in the legend. Mara specialized in abandoned coastal buildings and unexplained historical mysteries. She had heard the story of Blackwater Point many times, but she didn't believe in ghosts. She believed there was an explanation, a hidden room, a mechanical failure, a secret passage, perhaps even a crime. So when she received an old box containing Elias Vane's belongings, she decided to investigate. Inside the box was his journal. Most of the pages contained weather reports and ordinary notes, but several pages had been torn out. Near the end of the journal, Mara discovered something unusual. Elias had drawn the lighthouse's internal structure. There was the main staircase, the lantern room, the storage room, the living quarters. But beneath the lighthouse, he had drawn a room that did not appear on any official blueprint. At the bottom of the page, Elias had written, "Room 13. Mara immediately contacted the local historical society. Nobody knew about Room 13. An elderly fisherman named Thomas Reed finally agreed to speak with her. When Mara showed him the drawing, his face changed. "You shouldn't go there," he whispered. "Why?" Thomas looked toward the ocean. "Because that room was sealed for a reason." "What reason?" He hesitated. "My grandfather told me something about this lighthouse, something the village stopped talking about." "What?" Thomas lowered his voice. Blackwater Point was never built only to guide ships. Mara stared at him. What was it built for? Thomas didn't answer. Instead, he told her about a ship called the Morning Star. In 1898, the Morning Star disappeared during a storm. More than 80 people were aboard. No wreckage was ever found. But according to old lighthouse records, the ship had reached the coastline. The lighthouse keeper at the time reported seeing it. He reported something else too. The lighthouse light had turned red. The Morning Star vanished minutes later. Mara returned to the lighthouse 3 days later. She climbed the old tower alone. The interior smelled of salt, dust, and rust. Every step echoed through the empty building. When she reached the lantern room, she found the original mechanism still standing. The great lens was covered in dust. But beneath it was something strange. A narrow metal plate. Mara cleaned it with her sleeve. There were numbers engraved into it. She froze. The dates were separated by exactly 13 years. Then she noticed something even more disturbing. The final date was 2015, the year Elias disappeared. Mara checked the current year. 11 years had passed. She suddenly remembered the village legend. 13 years. A red light. A disappearance. She continued searching. Behind the main staircase, she discovered an iron door hidden beneath layers of paint. There was no handle, only a small circular opening. Mara pushed a piece of metal into it. The lock clicked. The door opened. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. Room 13 was real. At the bottom, Mara found a chamber filled with old equipment, telegraph machines, navigation instruments, rusty signal lamps, and dozens of wooden boxes. Each box had a name carved into it. Some belonged to people who had disappeared at sea. Others belonged to lighthouse keepers. Mara opened the nearest box. Inside was a photograph. It showed the crew of the Morning Star, but on the back was a handwritten note. They did not disappear. They were called. Mara felt a cold chill move through her. Then she heard something. A sound above her. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming down the staircase. Mara switched off her flashlight. The footsteps stopped. Silence filled the room. Then someone whispered her name. Mara. She nearly screamed. The voice sounded like an old man. A voice she had heard before. Elias Vane. She ran back upstairs. The lighthouse was empty, but the lantern room was glowing. White light swept across the ocean. Then it changed. Red. Mara looked through the window. Far out at sea, a ship appeared. Its lights were dim. Its shape looked ancient, and it was moving directly toward the lighthouse. Mara grabbed Elias's journal and ran downstairs. The final pages had changed. Words that hadn't been there before now appeared in faded ink. Every 13 years, the lighthouse chooses one. Mara turned the page. Do not let the light see you. The lighthouse beam passed through the room. Mara ducked behind the wall. The red light moved across the floor, then stopped. For several seconds, nothing happened. Suddenly, the old telegraph machine began clicking. Mara approached it carefully. The machine was operating by itself. A message appeared. Elias is still here. Mara stared at the words. Another message appeared. Room 13 is not a room. Then another. It is a door. The entire lighthouse shook. The sea outside rose violently. Mara looked toward the lantern. The red light was spinning faster. And then she understood. The lighthouse wasn't warning ships away. It was signaling something beneath the ocean. Something that had been waiting for more than a century. The ship outside disappeared. The red light went black. Mara ran toward the exit. But before she reached the door, she saw someone standing at the bottom of the stairs. An old man, wearing a lighthouse keeper's coat. His face was pale. His eyes were tired. Mara whispered one word. Elias. The man nodded. You found room 13. What is this place? Elias looked toward the ocean. It was built to communicate with the dead. Mara couldn't speak. Elias continued. Every ship that vanished near this coast left something behind. A memory. A voice. A name. The lighthouse collected them. Why? To keep them from returning. Mara looked at the red lantern above them. And the red light. Elias's expression became serious. It means the door is opening. A deep sound came from beneath the lighthouse. No, Elias whispered. You saw the room. You didn't see what was behind it. Mara followed him down. At the far wall was a circular stone door. Elias placed his hand against it. The stone began to glow. Behind it came the sound of waves. Then voices. Hundreds of voices. Calling names. Mara heard Elias's name. Then her own. She stepped backward. Elias looked at her. Don't listen. But it was already too late. The stone door began opening. Beyond it was not another room. It was the ocean. A vast black ocean stretching endlessly into darkness. And far away, Hundreds of lights floated beneath the water. Each light belonged to a missing ship. Mara understood the truth. The lighthouse had never been haunted. It had been holding something back. For more than a century, lighthouse keepers had sacrificed their lives to keep the door closed. Elias had disappeared in 2015 because he had become the keeper of the door. And now the lighthouse had chosen Mara. The red light began shining brighter. Elias handed her his journal. "Write your name." Mara looked at him. "What?" "Every keeper must leave a record." She opened the final page, but instead of writing her name, she wrote something else. "I refuse." The lighthouse shook violently. The underwater lights began rising. Elias smiled. For the first time, Mara saw hope in his eyes. "Good." "What?" "You're the first one who ever refused." Together they climbed toward the lantern room. Outside, the storm was beginning to fade. The horizon was turning grey. Sunrise was minutes away. Elias pointed toward the mechanism. "The red light needs one final signal." Mara understood. She turned the old mechanism manually. The red lens moved. Once, twice, 3 times. Then the light changed to white. A blinding beam swept across the ocean. The underwater lights disappeared. The waves fell silent. And the lighthouse went dark. When the Coast Guard arrived later that morning, they found Mara alone. Elias was gone. Again. But this time, there was no sign that he had ever been there. Mara showed them the hidden room. But room 13 had vanished. There was only a solid stone wall. The officials dismissed the entire story. They said Mara had been exhausted. They said the storm had damaged the lighthouse. They said there had never been a hidden chamber. Mara didn't argue. She returned home with Elias's journal. Months later, she published her investigation. Nobody believed it. Until the final page. Mara had included a photograph taken inside the lighthouse. The photograph showed the lantern room. Mara was standing beside the mechanism. Behind her was Elias Vane. But Elias had disappeared 20 years earlier. The photograph became famous. People argued about whether it was real. Experts called it an optical illusion. Others called it proof. Mara never explained it. Because she had discovered something else. Every 13 years, the lighthouse had chosen a keeper. Every 13 years, the lighthouse had chosen a keeper. And the next date was approaching. 2 years remained. But there was one final detail that terrified Mara. The lighthouse had not been destroyed. It was still standing. And every night, at exactly midnight, ships passing the coast reported seeing a single white light rotating across the ocean. Mara knew what that meant. The lighthouse was waiting. Waiting for the next keeper. Waiting for the next 13-year cycle. And somewhere beneath the black water, the lost ships were still glowing. Still waiting. Still calling names. So if you ever find yourself near an abandoned lighthouse on a stormy night, and you see a light turning red over the ocean, don't assume it's a warning. Because sometimes, the last light you see isn't guiding you home. Sometimes, it's remembering you. And if you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to subscribe to Whispering Walls for more forgotten buildings, unexplained mysteries, and stories hidden inside places that history tried to forget. Because somewhere out there, another old door is waiting to be opened, and the next story might already be calling your name.